Okay, thank you very much, Raj. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Sarah Stopforth and I'm a research fellow at the University of Sussex. And today I'm going to be presenting some research I've developed with colleagues Professor Vernon Gale at the University of Edinburgh and Professor Ellen Byrne from the University of Glasgow. And we were looking at social class inequalities in GCSE attainment. So to provide a little bit of context, examining parental social class and school outcomes is an area of long-standing sociological inquiry. Since the post-war period in Britain, we've seen really whole-scale changes in the education system. We've seen changes to the structure and organisations of schools, to the curricula, changes to grading structures, the assessments young people take, the types of qualifications, and yet research consistently finds that children living in families in less advantaged socioeconomic positions tend to also have less favourable educational outcomes than their more advantaged peers. So the consequences of this are hugely important for the individual. Less favourable educational outcomes can lead to more restricted opportunities and choices in further education, in the labour market, in youth employment or unemployment, and in the potential earnings in both the immediate and the longer term. So the area of focus of this research is the General Certificate of Secondary Education, or GCSE. And GCSEs are standard qualifications undertaken at the age of 15 or 16 for young people in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And these exams are the first major branching point for young people. They mark a really significant break in young people's school careers, and the results of the GCSEs directly influence their next steps. So young people study for individualised portfolios of subjects, and this can comprise compulsory subjects like English and maths, and a wide range of non-compulsory subjects like languages, technology, arts, and many, many more. The exact portfolio of subjects will be determined by choice of the young person and their parents, encouragement from teachers, which subjects different schools offer, and down to more mundane reasons like timetabling constraints. Qualifications are studied at the subject level and then awarded at the subject level. For the young people in the analyses I'm presenting today, GCSEs were graded alphabetically. Of course, that's now changed, but for the purposes of this presentation, the GCSEs were graded from the top grade A* to G, and there was also U for unclassified qualifications. And gaining a GCSE at grades A* to C was considered a good pass. For these cohorts, the policy benchmark was the achievement of 5 or more A* to C, so these good passes. And achieving this tended to unlock further opportunities for young people, and it was often the requirement to continue studying in further education. So GCSEs were introduced in the late 1980s as part of the 1988 Education Reform Act. And over time, we generally observe improving GCSE outcomes. So we see that later cohorts of young people tend to have better educational outcomes, GCSE outcomes, than earlier cohorts of young people. And there's substantial empirical evidence of social inequalities in these GCSE outcomes, for example, in social class, ethnicity, gender. And in particular, we found that previous research sees clear social class inequalities in GCSE outcomes. Pupils from families in more advantaged social classes tend to have more favourable outcomes than their peers in less advantaged social classes. So the research question for this work is, what is the contemporary relationship between parental social class and children's GCSE attainment? And what we want to try and unpick in this work is what the relationship is for the most up-to-date and contemporary data that we have available to us. So we use the British Household Panel Survey and, of course, Understanding Society. We use all 18 waves of data for the BHPS spanning 1991 to 2008, and we use the first 5 waves of Understanding Society with linked national pupil database records. We identify young people who have just sat their GCSE exams and have very recently received their results. And we organise these individuals into synthetic cohorts based on their academic year. So we only use the young people in England, and that's because the records available to use in the National Pupil Database were for English state school pupils only. So to keep it consistent, we just use England only. The information on GCSE attainment is self-reported in the BHPS, so young people are asked about their recent qualifications. In Understanding Society, the GCSE data is linked from the official administrative education records in the National Pupil Database. So I think a really, really rich and fantastic aspect of both of these surveys is the ability to match data from the young person themselves with their broader household information, and then also the information provided by the parents themselves in the adult interviews. And from this, so we get two main samples, and I'll be referring to these as the BHPS sample and the Understanding Society sample. In the BHPS, we have a sample size of 1,624 young people, and in Understanding Society, we have 1,175 young people. And this is what it's all about, the GCSE attainment of these young people. This is the key variable of interest, and what we want to do in this work is to understand why the differences in GCSE attainment occur. So this is the measure we're using, the number of GCSEs attained at grades A star to C, so the number of good passes. This graph is from the Understanding Society sample, and we have a similar one for the BHPS sample. And we can see in this sample that the percentage of young people, there's about 11% of young people who achieve no A star to Cs. But I want to stress that these individuals do achieve at least one D to G. So here we're not conflating those who have no GCSEs at all with those who just haven't sat the exams. So why are we interested in social class? Well, occupation-based social class measures are associated with three really important aspects of people's economic lives: income security, short-term income stability, and longer-term income prospects. And sociologists would agree that individuals in similar social class positions tend to share similar economic circumstances, material resources, lifestyles, and life chances. And we find that social class is a really key aspect of these differential resources and rewards within society. So as I mentioned before, previous and now older research has found that social class is a really important factor in educational inequalities. And so we're investigating this with more recent and really rich household panel data. We use the National Statistics Socio-Economic classification as our measure of social class. This is the official UK social class measure used by the Office for National Statistics, and it's widely used in policy and social science research. It's derived using information on occupation, so occupation title, and employment status. So this is referring to whether workers are in more of a service relationship or labour contracts with their employers. Those who are in similar NSEC categories are considered to have similar market situations, so levels of income, economic security, chances of economic advancement, and also similar work situations, for example, levels of authority and control in their job. So this is a schema. We're using an 8-category version of the schema, and at the top we have NSEC 1.1 for large employers, higher managerial and administrative occupations, for example, chief executives of large businesses. In NSEC 1.2, we have higher professional occupations, and these occupations generally require a degree level education. So, for example, doctors and lawyers would be in NSEC 1.2. In NSEC 2, we have lower managerial, administrative and professional occupations, for example, nurses or school teachers. Taken together, NSEC 1.1, 1.2 and 2 are the managerial and professional occupations. In NSEC 3, we have intermediate occupations, for example, secretaries or police officers. In NSEC 4, we have small employers and own account workers, for example, owners of small businesses or taxi drivers. And taken together, these are considered the intermediate occupations. And then in NSEC 5, we have lower supervisory and technical occupations, for example, mechanics or chefs. In NSEC 6, semi-routine occupations, for example, retail assistants or care workers. And in NSEC 7, routine occupations, for example, hairdressers and cleaners. And taken together, NSEC 5, 6 and 7 represent routine and manual occupations. So this schema is not strictly hierarchical, but we can intimate that those in the managerial and professional occupations are in more advantaged social class positions than those in routine and manual occupations. Okay, so to get into the data, this graph represents the mean number of GCSEs at grades A star to C over time. So on the x-axis at the bottom, we have the academic year when the young people sat their GCSE exams. And on the y-axis, we have the mean number of GCSEs achieved at grades A star to C. Towards the left-hand side, with the circle markers, this is our BHPS sample, so the older cohorts of young people. And to the right, with the diamonds, this is the Understanding Society sample, so our more contemporary cohorts of young people. And in this graph, we can see this general improvement in GCSE results over time. So the mean number of GCSEs achieved at the top grades are, or seem to be, increasing over the academic cohorts, and this fits with previous research and statistics of a general improvement over time. But if we then stratify this by social class, we start to see a really clear pattern emerging. So in this graph, we still have the mean number of GCSEs at grades A star to C on the y-axis, but now we have parent NSEC or parent social class on the x-axis. We're just looking at the BHPS sample for the minute, and there's this clear social class gradient to the mean number of GCSEs achieved at grades A star to C. In particular, we see that those with parents in NSEC 1.2, the higher professional occupations, who might be doctors or lawyers or similar occupations, they have the highest mean number of GCSEs at grades A star to C, compared with the lowest mean numbers for those with parents in NSEC 6 and 7, so semi-routine and routine occupations. If I add in the Understanding Society sample, we can see that this really clear pattern of social class difference continues to persist for our most contemporary cohorts of young people. And the differences between the most and least advantaged positions is roughly equivalent to about 4 extra A star to C GCSEs, which is not a trivial difference at all. So to investigate this further, we estimate statistical models of our outcome measure, the number of GCSEs attained at grades A star to C, and this is the graph that I've shown you before. And in these models, we include explanatory measures, which previous research has demonstrated also have really important influences on GCSE outcomes. So we're looking at parent social class, parent education, housing tenure, gender, ethnicity, and academic year. So before I go ahead and show you the model results from this, I just want to explain a little bit about what the model is doing. So the model works in 2 stages. The first stage looks at this division that I've highlighted here. So it's between those who have no GCSEs at grades A star to C and those who have some GCSEs at grades A star to C. So in the first part, the model is looking at the propensity to achieve at least 1 A star to C. In the second stage of the model, it then just looks at those who have achieved at least 1 A star to C and models the differences in how many GCSEs the young people are achieving. So we run this model separately on the BHPS sample and Understanding Society sample, and the results are really, really similar. We find that young people in the less advantaged social class positions, and specifically we're talking about those in semi-routine and routine occupations, they are less likely to achieve any GCSEs at grades A star to C compared with their more advantaged peers. For those who do achieve at least 1 A star to C, they are then less likely to achieve as many GCSEs at grades A star to C than their more advantaged peers. And in particular, we find that they struggle to achieve the policy benchmark of 5 or more A star to Cs. So if I present this graphically, this is now the expected number of GCSEs at grades A star to C, and it's based on the second part of the model. So these are the expected numbers given that the young person has achieved at least 1 A star to C. And again, we see this really clear, really familiar social class gradient where those in NSEC 1.2 in particular are expected to achieve much higher numbers of A-star to Cs than those in less advantaged positions. This is adding in the Understanding Society sample, and the trends are really, really similar from the older cohorts and the younger cohorts. So showing this real clear stability in the effects of social class on GCSE outcomes. If I highlight the number 5 on the y-axis, 5 A-star to Cs, we can then see that it's those in the less advantaged positions who are struggling to achieve this policy benchmark. So this social class effect is clear even after accounting for a whole host of other factors that we know are important in GCSEs, and we can see it very clearly in the older cohorts in the BHPS and the younger cohorts in Understanding Society. So to conclude, we've seen a general improvement in GCSE outcomes for successive cohorts of young people. However, at the same time, we're seeing this clear occupation-based social class gradient to GCSE outcomes. This gradient holds after adjusting for parent education level, housing tenure, gender, ethnicity, and academic year. In particular, we find that young people in the least advantaged positions are not only less likely to achieve any GCSEs at grades A-star to C, but they're also less likely to achieve as many GCSEs as their more advantaged peers, and they may even struggle to achieve the policy benchmark of 5 or more. So the implications of this at an individual level are really, really important in terms of the immediate and longer term prospects for young people. But at a societal level, we are observing this remarkable stability in social class inequalities in GCSEs throughout the 1990s and 2000s, and then into the 2010s for some of our most recent cohorts. So since the cohorts in the analyses that I've just shown you undertook their GCSEs, we've seen a whole range of new policy changes for some of the most contemporary young people. So in the past few years, we've seen changes to the curricula, changes from modular assessments to a linear system, changes to the grading system, like I mentioned before. So it obviously still remains to be seen whether these changes will have an effect on the inequalities that are presented here. But we've seen in the post-war period a whole raft of changes to the education system, like I mentioned at the beginning. And despite these continual changes, we still see these clear social class differences in education attainment according to the occupation of children's parents. And so the fact that these inequalities are so persistent, and we can clearly see this social class gradient continuing into some of the most contemporary cohorts in the early 2010s, is really quite worrying. It's something that needs to be examined more closely to understand why these inequalities continue to persist and what tangible and measurable steps we can take to try and close this attainment gap going forward. That's it from me. Thank you very much for listening.